Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Danielle Day, Senior Medical Director at Sobi North America, and we talk about how MSLs grow within the role and beyond. Great conversation. Hope you guys enjoy it. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube, of course, and check us out on MSL Talk Live on Clubhouse. Hey, Danielle, how you doing today? Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is going to be fun. I'm so glad that we're doing this.
Me too.
So let's start, like we always start with an introduction, and I know about your background, but I wanted to see if maybe just to introduce you, your background, what you're up to these days, and then we could kind of get a little more into like the topic.
Sure. So let's see, how far back do we go? The older I get, the more there is to tell.
well, you know, I think that, so today we're going to talk about like how to grow within the MSL role. And then beyond. Right. So there's a couple different pieces to this.
Yeah.
So you're a PhD, right?
I am. Yes. We could start there. So I never heard of an MSL when I was a PhD. It didn't exist. You were sort of beaten into this idea of following in the footsteps of your PhD advisor, which meant you were going to walk uphill in the snowstorm both ways and write grants and publish or perish. And that was going to be your life, right? In academia. And God forbid you should ever go to the dark side, which is industry, right? So my first job out of my PhD program was actually at a research institution on an Army base. I was a scientist for the military nutrition division, and it was a great job. I actually got a real salary versus going to postdoctoral fellowship, which for those people listening know that that's not a great salary to go down that path. That really is walking up the hill both sides in a snowstorm. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't super happy with that role. It was a government job. I liked the people. I loved the ability to be a civilian serving the military in that capacity. But I had a lot of time to think about what else I might want to do. We'll just put it that way. And that was actually when I first saw a description of a medical science liaison. And I remember reading that description and thinking, why did nobody ever tell me about this? This sounds like the best job in the world. And then, of course, the next question was, but how do you become one? Because every single job description says must have experience. Right. So that was in like 2005, 2006. And I think I saw the Carolan group was you guys were around then. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was when you Googled MSL, that was one of the first things that came up. So I'm sure I reached out to you at some point way back then, and may have even, talked to you over email or whatnot, but just kind of couldn't figure out how you could carve a path for yourself down that road towards the MSL. So it was in the back of my mind, but I really couldn't figure out a way to get into that. So I ended up going back to academia. And I worked at a couple of universities, a small one and then a larger one. And I was tenure track at the University of Massachusetts and thinking about my long-term career. And it's the same thing I always told my students to think about was, what do you really want to do? And make sure you're kind of keeping your mind open always and not just thinking about the next day or the next month, the next year, but what about 20 years from now? And in my mind, I was thinking, I don't think this is what I want to do 20 years from now. I loved the teaching and I still miss that part of it, but I didn't really love the research anymore. I didn't love the pressure of getting grants and publications. And so I actually thought, well, maybe I got the wrong degree and I should go to medical school. So I was like in year 5 of my tenure track position, and I started looking into going to get the other D degree and going back to medical school.
Wow.
Yeah. And I found out that all of my coursework from undergrad had expired. So I would teach during the day and be Dr. Day. And then I would go across campus at night and sit in like freshman chemistry and freshman physics classes.
Jeez.
So I spent about 3 semesters doing that, trying to catch up on all the coursework at night while doing my day job. And I started taking an MCAT class, and I was like, oh my God, this test is going to be really hard. What if I don't pass? And then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of old. What if I, can't stay awake during 8 hours of classes and all the studying? And so I thought maybe I should have a backup plan. And I called a friend of mine who had gone straight to industry, and we did our PhDs together. And I said, can you tell me about your job and this MSL role? I read about it about 5 years ago, but I still don't really understand what it is or how to get into it. And this is like where luck plays a huge role in this. She wrote back and said, send me your resume. We have 21 openings right now.
No way. And what company was this?
That was AstraZeneca.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I said, so I did. I pulled my resume together. I had a conversation with her, and she set me up with a phone interview. And she sent me a list of all the territories that were open and said, where would you be willing to move? And I knew that I would likely have to move if I wanted to make this career move. So I was open to that, but I wasn't open to everywhere in the country. Yeah. So I gave her kind of my short list, and I went on my first phone screen interview with a hiring manager in the Boston area for a cardiology position. And I was not prepared at all. I thought it was just going to be kind of a casual, laid back conversation. And I'll never forget, he said to me, so why AstraZeneca? And I kind of paused because I certainly wasn't prepared for that question. I just wanted to be
like, my friend works here. I don't know.
Exactly.
You said too. He told me.
And he nailed it right away. He was like, is it just because you know this other person? And I was like, well, I mean, I think it's a great company. But he went back to her and he said, first of all, cardiology in Boston with a green MSL is probably not going to be the best position to set her up for success, and maybe not the company either. So I failed that phone screen. And then I went and did all my research on AstraZeneca as a company and got very prepared, and things were kind of quiet for a while after that. And then maybe a month or so later, another opportunity came up, and she said a position just opened in Colorado. And I had done my graduate work in Colorado. So I was like, man, I'd love to move back there. It was a new MSL manager, and she was open to hiring people without experience. And I think that that's a very clutch thing, is like finding that person who's open-minded enough to realize. And I did my phone screen with her, and I explained my background and my research. And she was like, I love, like your personality. I think this would be a great fit. And she said, what do you think your biggest challenge would be coming into this role? And I said, the fact that I know nothing about the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
And I was very honest about it. And she was like, oh, don't worry about that. We can teach you that.
Well, you wound up with you had a very reasonable, easygoing manager, which
she just wanted, she's like, I just want the right personality for my team. And I say this to hiring managers all the time. And I hope that recruiters, push back on some of these companies too, that keep saying it has to be someone with experience. It has to be someone with experience, because that manager took a chance on me, but I took that as like, I need to prove myself to her now.
Yeah.
And so I came on board, and I hustled and I grinded, and I wanted to be the best I could possibly be. And I didn't want to let her down. I mean, she took a huge chance on me. I took a huge chance, also, moved myself across the country and took this new role and everything. And while I was at AstraZeneca, I always like to highlight this. I was on an awards committee 1 year for Med Affairs Awards, and I got to read all of the nominations, which is like the best job in the world, because you're like, this is the best of the best, all of the happy things that are happening in the company that you don't even realize. And what I noticed was there were so many nominations for these young MSLs who were in their first year, just crushing it, like just accomplishing so many things that were just out of this world and outside the realm of your, the defined roles of the job. And I just thought, boy, people should recognize more that when you hire someone who's green and just feels grateful to have been admitted into the club, you're going to get somebody who's going to go to the
run through a brick wall. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of managers hire aspiring MSLs, is because they know that they're going to get that eagerness.
Yes.
And going back to your point, I think you took advantage of the fact that you had a hiring manager that was hiring on fit.
Yeah.
not just on experience and all this other stuff. They wanted the personality, and they wanted the scientific background and skills and acumen. So when you're interviewing, it's so important to make sure you highlight the best version of yourself in every way. Because, a lot of times when you hear from a hiring manager or an HR person, they say, well, the person's not a fit. Well, that could mean anything. So it's up to you when you're interviewing to make yourself the fit by doing all the extra things and making sure that you, again, come off in the best way possible. Okay, so you become an MSL.
Yeah.
You're crushing it. You love it. And then how'd you get into, you got into leadership roles?
I loved being an MSL. I advanced pretty quickly at AstraZeneca, and I got myself involved with a number of different initiatives and projects. And I started some initiatives just based on my interests and the interests of the KOLs in my territory. And that led to collaborations with publications and with marketing and with market access. And I just got exposure to all of these different parts of the company, and by design too. I mean, every time I heard of a new, I was clueless. I didn't even know what medical affairs was or that it existed before this job. And so every time I heard a new title or a new department, I was like, what does that department do? And I try to find somebody there and say, would you just get on a call with me and tell me what you do? Because I'm interested in this. And, I just asked a ton of questions. And then anytime there was an opportunity to be involved with a project or bring a project to publications or, again, to marketing, and just say, I've got these people in my territory. They have this unique interest that I think would be aligned with our strategy. What do you think? And it was just throw those ideas out there, have that conversation. And it wasn't always a yes, but eventually it was a yes. And eventually it was like, oh, wow, nobody's ever thought about this way before. And this could be interesting. Let's explore it. So it was just taking a lot of chances and just putting myself out there. And I think part of that was a benefit of being naive, honestly, because if I'd been an MSL for 10 years, I might have been kind of in that routine of, well, this is what we do. And they hand us the strategy and we go out in the field and we execute on it. But I was, like I said, I was kind of clueless. I was like, I don't know. I just called this person and had a conversation with them and they were like, yeah, let's explore that more, so it was a benefit. So I think I'm a yoga instructor also, and I like to bring a lot of like the yoga philosophy into everything. But one of the things we talk about when people come to a yoga class is there's only so many poses you can do. So you come in and it's going to be some combination of those poses. But what I like to always say and practice myself is like, pretend you've never been here before. Pretend you've never done a downward dog before. What does it feel like today? Because your body's going to be different day to day. Yeah. And I think that is a really helpful thing to think about when you've been in a role for a long time too. If you're in a new company or if you're in the same company, just pretend that you've never been here before, and just ask more questions and be curious and just think, I've been doing things the same way for a long time. What if I just tried something different? And instead of just thinking like, well, they're never going to go for this. Maybe they will, That's great advice. Quick shout out. There's a lot of people that reach out to me and say that they listen to the podcast while they're working out. So if you're working out right now, get after it. Do an extra mile. If you're walking, do an extra mile, do a couple 100%. Extra reps. Yeah. So, no, but that's so basically what you're saying is you want to come in with come up with maybe some creative ideas or be an out of the box thinker a little bit and put yourself out there because you don't know what you might get from it. Yeah. Yeah. And then ask those people too, kind of if you're talking to someone who works in publications, what's the publication strategy right now? Where are the gaps? Are you guys looking for people to write review articles? Are you looking for people to do case studies? Kind of get a sense of that, because then you can be in your territory listening for those opportunities and then bringing them back. And now you've got a way to collaborate and yourself work on a publication. So I was able to co-author a couple of abstracts at AstraZeneca after I proposed that we look at some of the clinical trial data in a retrospective analysis assessing potential differences in efficacy and safety between women and men, which hadn't been done before, but had KOLs in my territory who ran a Center for Women's Health Research. And I had a background in my own research of looking at sex differences in physiology. And so it all kind of came together, and it was something that the company had never done before. And it was just a unique angle. Yeah. And that, that led into a lot of other initiatives related to that topic as well. So, it was lucky in some ways, but it was also just continuing to try. I didn't get a no immediately when I brought this idea up. It took a while of me sort of trying to convince, and I had to think about how to pitch those ideas. So it was a really great learning experience. And then in that involvement with those other functions in the company is what led me to think, I do love being an MSL, but I'm sort of curious about what goes into the strategy that's handed to the team and what goes on behind the curtain.
Well, and it wasn't luck. You put yourself out there. You were proactive in your approach. Yeah. So when we talk about this concept of growth within the role, that doesn't just happen. It happens because you take a proactive approach to something. So it sounded like this is almost like networking. It's like internal networking, or collaboration and cross-functional engagement within the department to kind of put yourself out there. I mean, am I botching this, or is that kind of?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly how I would describe it, is internal networking. And again, just getting to understand the commercial strategy. I mean, I think a lot of times we do get really isolated when you're one in the field, two in field medical. And so understanding what the overarching strategy is for the business, for the commercial side, for then the functions within medical affairs as well. And then taking that and thinking, like, what can I do in my territory that would allow me to support that? And also give me an opportunity to learn a new skill set and what goes into publications. And I mean, I was on calls with the biostatisticians from our global team as we were putting this abstract together. I mean, I got to run an ad board, which is very unusual for an MSL, particularly at a large company like that. But it was an ad board on diabetes in women. And that was kind of I owned that whole project. And so it just gave me a ton of exposure to the other side of the medical affairs function out in the in-house functions, really.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good segue into, how do we look at this? Do we look at this so you have MSLs that might be career MSLs? That's pretty much all they really want to do. And maybe there's a different version of it that they want to evolve into. But then you have MSLs that want to evolve into something different. So it's like almost like there's different tracks.
Yeah.
So what's your opinion on how people should, number one, assess what they want to be when they grow up, and how they get there, and then there's how do they get there?
So some of the best advice that I got, because even after all of that exposure to the different departments in med affairs, I still was kind of like, I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what all of the different roles even are. And so through that internal networking, I got hooked up with one of the VPs at AstraZeneca, who's this amazing guy. I mean, obviously very high up in the company. He's somewhere else now, but I wrote to him, he had no idea who I was. He wasn't in the same therapeutic area as me, but I just said, a mentor of mine here at AZ has said that, you'd be willing to maybe talk to me about my career development. And he was like, sure, schedule time with me next time you're in Wilmington. And he gave me an hour of his time.
Wow.
I went in and the best advice I got from him was, don't think about a specific role or a title that you want. Think about the skills that you want to acquire. And then if you can figure out what the skills are that you want to acquire, then you can look for opportunities. And it may not be defined by a certain role. It may just be a project or a rotation or just something that you want to get exposure to it to see if it's what you really like. So I thought that was really good advice from him. And that's something that I've thought about ever since.
Well, it's funny because a lot of times when we think, and I know me as a recruiter, like we think about this in the terms of titles. What are the titles that we need to be pursuing? And you're saying kind of the opposite. What you're saying is seek out an opportunity based upon, maybe skill set or responsibilities or what might be involved in that role. Which I guess the only way is if you kind of raise your hand and ask and start to poke around.
Exactly. And that goes right back to it. Like, what's involved in medical information? What do you people do on a day-to-day basis? What's your favorite part of your job? What's your least favorite part of your job? Like, make sure you get the good, the bad, and the ugly when you talk to somebody about the role that they do every day. And they're like, well, most of it's great, but this part really stinks. And people used to ask me that about being an MSL, like, what's the least favorite part of your job? And I would always be like, expense reports.
Yeah, of course, paperwork.
Yeah, the paperwork part, but it's
No
a
one
part
likes
of it. And then the follow-up question should be like, how much time do you spend on that? Because when I used to teach at the university, I was in the Department of Physical Therapy, and I had all these young students who wanted to be physical therapists. And I'd bring people in to talk about what they did with their exercise physiology degrees that was not physical therapy, just so they could get different perspectives. And I said, present the good, the bad, and the ugly of your job. And so many times people in the PT field, a lot of the healthcare practitioners will tell you that, would just say, my job is more paperwork than people. And what I thought it was going to be was more people than paperwork. So
Right.
that was a real eye opener for a lot of people who were thinking about going down that path. Maybe they still want to go down that path, but at least they had that expectation now. It's like, it's not going to just be helping people every day. It's going to be a lot of documentation and this other kind of stuff too. And the same is true for the MSL role,
Yeah.
right?
So this is interesting. I'm going to go back to like you. So you took a deep dive, and what you're saying is you kind of have to take a deep dive, almost be like an investigative journalist.
Yeah.
And ask a lot of questions and try to see if you can get some insight into how things work. And like, I know they say sometimes you don't want to see the sausage being made kind of thing, but like you're saying, check out the sausage.
I mean, if you have the stomach for it, right?
I don't know.
Maybe like you said, you don't really want to know. You're like, I'm happy with whatever those people are doing back there. They're just going to hand this to me on a plate and tell me to go do my job, and that's fine. And I think, again, it's about knowing yourself. And sometimes it's not great to see what's going on behind the curtain because it's chaos. I mean, a lot of it's chaos. I'm there now.
Yeah.
But no, I think if you have that kind of curiosity, you should at least entertain that and explore it a little bit and just see, like, then you know what you don't want to do also. Like, oh, this is what, marketing is. This is what pharmacovigilance is. Yeah, no, I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
But then you can tick that off the list.
The other way to do it, and the easy way to do it, is to look at job descriptions.
Yeah.
And that's, from my standpoint, that's kind of what we tell people to do, is you look at the other titles that exist within medical affairs that might be a good next step for an MSL like yourself to move into, and look at the job description for these titles and see what might be, number one, a good fit for you, and number two, something that you're interested in and you have the transferable skills for.
Right.
So that's the other way.
Right.
So let's talk about titles for a second. So we'll take a little bit of a step away from that, so that's your approach of being the investigative journalist, is going in and meeting with a bunch of people internally and putting yourself out there. I think that's awesome advice. And I think that's something that is somewhat of a newer concept on this podcast. I don't think we really talked about that approach in all of the episodes that I've been involved in, which is all of them. But so I think that's awesome. I love the idea of the internal networking and being able to learn and see what other people do. But what if you just want to go after specific titles? What's your thought on that? And what titles do you think people can grow into?
From the MSL role?
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I think the field medical role, and I've heard you guys mention this on previous podcasts too, I mean, obviously is an incredibly unique role and an incredibly unique skill set. And I know that there are companies with in-house people who are trying to move up the career ladder in-house who will actually get stymied at points if they have never spent time in field medical, which is interesting. I mean, so there are companies that really value that perspective. And I think that that's another thing to question when you're thinking about moving to a different company, or even within your company, is where do you place the value on field medical as experience? Because some people see it as very narrow experience, and other people will say, no, this is like the foundational experience. Like, you actually know what our customers are thinking and saying, and you have the ability to get the insights, whereas we're sometimes operating in a conference room with a little bit of, a wall between us and that world. So there's tremendous value in bringing that to an in-house position. In terms of going after a certain title or a certain role, I mean, if you really know, if you've worked with somebody in that role and you know what the role's about and you think it's a good fit for you and you have the skill set and the interest, like you said, then I don't see an issue with that. For me personally, I've benefited from having two really diverse medical affairs roles in smaller companies. And I think this is the benefit of being in a smaller company. So I was at 2 small biotechs where my role was a very general associate director of medical affairs. And it was a catch-all. It was like these companies that didn't have very many medical affairs employees. They did value the field experience so even though I didn't have any in-house experience, it was, well, we understand field medical and think that that's a great foundation for anything med affairs. And so come on in and you'll get exposure to, and I did, pub strategy, running ad boards, still being kind of an MSL too. So it's sort of like an MSL plus, and a really awesome opportunity to transition, at least get a peek into what those home office opportunities look like. To me, that was better. I like that kind of variety approach versus, I guess I'm not really like a laser focused person. I actually, it really irritates me. There's an ice cream stand near my house that doesn't allow you to get more than one flavor unless you order a large. And I'm like literally trying to get my neighbors together to run a picket line on this place. Because
seriously,
like what is the point? Like you're scooping multiple times to give me a small. Why can't you just scoop once over there and once over there and give me 2 flavors?
I mean, go the extra step, man. You are in a service position delivering happiness. It's ice cream.
Right.
Good God, man. You got to be a little more nimble than that. I've never heard of such a thing.
I know. So, but that's a little bit like, from my personality perspective, I like to try a little bit of different things and have variety in my job. So
I'd sign that petition, by the way, but
thank you.
No, I see your point. I mean, I see the point that you're making, and I think it's a good one. And I think that the other point that you're making that is important, and that's why these conversations are so difficult, is that there's a difference between small company and large company.
Yeah.
And there's a difference in how you grow, either within the MSL role or beyond the MSL role, in a small company and in a large company.
Yeah.
So you really kind of do need to find out what you think you want to do next, because it's going to be important to know how to navigate that in a small company versus a large company. Small company, you get to wear a lot of hats. You just explained that, you just get to do a lot. In a larger company, there's going to be a million different titles. And you could have a lot of different other places that you can evolve to. Whereas in a small company with less infrastructure, you're going to be limited in the number of opportunities as far as titles that you can grow into. But you're going to have a lot more opportunity to do more, because you're not going to have the title, but you're probably just going to be doing it anyway.
Right. And I mean, but with those small companies too, if you get in early and you're doing this more diverse medical affairs support, whatever needs to get done, wearing a ton of hats, you're getting all that experience, but you're also identifying like the days that you dread. If you're like, oh my God, I have to like track down all these authors so we can get this abstract, to this conference submission. If that's not your jam, then eventually when you are ready to grow, you can be like, hey, let's hire somebody in publications so that I can take that off my plate. And you kind of get to carve your own path in those places if you get in early. And again, I think you can make a strong case as an MSL if you are trying to go in-house. Like those big companies, there's limited positions. I've heard you guys talk about that on your podcast too. You're competing against a lot of other people, maybe MSLs that have more experience than you. So, I mean, one, as we talked about earlier, making yourself visible, making it known that you have aspirations to at least learn more about the other opportunities outside of a field medical role, but then also ask about doing rotations, being on projects and things like that. So then when something does open up in those departments, they can say, boy, I wonder if that MSL that, worked with us on this project would be interested in joining our team. We have an opening. I know that they said they weren't sure if they wanted to be an MSL forever. So you have to make that connection. It's a little bit harder, I would say, at a big company, but certainly not impossible. And I've seen it happen. And then also asking, you talked about a specific role, ask for feedback from your managers. And this was another thing I did at AstraZeneca too. I'd say, well, now that you guys have seen me work for a couple of years, like what kind of role do you think I would be a good fit for from your impression? And they'd say, oh, well, this is a role that, has X, Y, and Z. And I think that this would be a good match for your personality, your skill set, your interests. And so, use those people, your managers, your coaches, the directors that have seen your work, give you some of that direction as well.
So what you're saying, because I was going to ask about that, because you mentioned in-house role a couple of
Yeah.
times, and I do talk to a lot of people who are like, yeah, I eventually want to go in-house.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is to get yourself prepared or position yourself for an in-house role, that's something you have to work at, and you have to put yourself in different situations to gain the experience that you can document on your CV, so that eventually when the time comes, you can show that you have that experience
Yeah.
to be able to say, yeah, hey, I think I'm qualified for this because I did this, this, and this. I was involved in all these different projects. Oh, and by the way, I talked to my manager. My manager said I'd be good at this too.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I'm also a big fan of being pretty open and transparent about what you don't know. Like I told that first story where I was like, I have no idea about the pharmaceutical industry. It's and I've done that a couple of times on interviews where I've just kind of been like, throwing it out there, thinking like that was maybe was not the best decision to let them know that. And it's never backfired on me. It's always been just like, wow, I think it's really great that you brought that up as like an area of development for yourself or a gap, and because the last thing you want to do too is kind of sell something that you can't follow through on. And then you get there and they hand you this project and they're like, you're good, right? Okay, go ahead. And you're like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, that's a really, you got to do that dance. That's a real, you have to balance that, because as much as people kind of try to fake it till they make it, you can't really fake it too much, because if you oversell your capabilities and then you get in the role and you're not able to deliver, well, then the person that gave you that opportunity is going to be pretty upset. But the other part of it is you do want to be able to make sure that you can you express your capabilities. It's okay to say, hey, I don't have direct experience in this, but I do have this.
Exactly.
And that's why I think I'd be really good for this role.
Exactly. Yeah. If you have, sort of the foundational elements that are required to do that. Well, I haven't done it in that context before, but I've done it in this context before. I mean, even for getting your first MSL job, if you've been a teaching assistant, as a PhD or whatnot, you use that experience, right? Like I'm up in front of people all the time. I'm putting presentations together. I'm explaining really complex things in simple ways that people can understand it. We use that, right, to talk about how we would be good at getting in front of KOLs and talking about the data.
Right.
So you know how to do that, even just getting into that first role. And it's the same thing kind of for the next level of going from MSL to in-house and using that leverage of like, hey, I know what the outside world thinks about our product and thinks about this disease state and where the challenges really are. Like I know how to talk to these people and get that information from them. That's going to be incredibly valuable to you in terms of creating your strategy.
Right.
And then if you're, I would also always ask about what kind of support you're going to have. Like if it's something that you haven't done before, you can say, I could probably figure this out, but will there be someone for me to ask about this and who can kind of help me on the first round or something? Because again, you don't want to get into a situation where you're plucked into a void somewhere and just told to go do what you need to do. And you're like, nobody's there to ask questions.
You wake up one day and you're like, wait a second, nobody told me this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think you're really good at that. Obviously, everything that you've described in your past has really been defined by the questions that you've asked either before, during, or after. Like, you have created this really awesome knack of asking the right questions, so that not only are you learning for yourself, but you're also being able to like make sure that you're not signing on for something that isn't really going to work out, or that there's going to be any surprises.
Well, you make it sound very polished in that regard, but a lot of it is from having some not so great experiences as well.
Yeah, you learn trial by fire.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'll fully admit, like my first role going from the field to an in-house position where I was like, oh, I've totally got this. I didn't totally got this. It was a huge shell shock. I had a great manager, but he was super busy all the time. And so a lot of times I was kind of left with like, all right, I think I'm doing this right, and there were some things that just didn't go very well. And it was a huge learning experience for me too. Probably the best learning experience I've ever had. I mean, it gave me a ton of feedback and self-awareness and ability to pivot and move forward and like then know what I really needed to ask, especially going, from the field to home office, also going from a huge company to a tiny company. Like there's so many things that I know now and try to counsel people to ask when they're making those kinds of switches too, because it's very different environments.
So we talk about growing, MSLs growing within the role and beyond. Is the beyond in your mind, is that the in-house role? What else might be a beyond?
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, I think management positions are another obvious one. I mean, to stay in field medical and become a people manager, I think that's also a very unique setting. And I think that you had asked a question about, management development opportunities within organizations. Probably not something we do very well. Just because you have a great MSL doesn't mean they're going to be a great MSL manager, right? It's just like anywhere. But it seems to be the case across any function, not just med affairs, right? People get to a certain level in their role and they say, okay, well, now we need someone to lead the team. How about you? Since you've been here the longest, you've done the most. And that might not be somebody who even likes to manage people or even has a knack for it. So I think these positions are incredibly hard to get. I've been mentoring someone for the last couple of years who's thrown her hat in the ring several times trying to get these management positions. And I'm super happy she just recently finally got one, but it was like, try and try and try again. And what I loved about her approach to this was she called me to prepare for her first interview. I think it was about 2 years ago. I helped her prepare for it. She didn't get the position. So she came back to me and said, I've asked them for feedback, and I'd also like you to help me, fill the gaps that I need to get one of these roles. Would you mentor me? And so I was like, sure. I mean, the fact that she was just like, didn't take that rejection as a stop point. She was like, okay, now what do I do? And she applied to several other positions. And every time it was, can you give me some feedback? What am I missing? Okay. And then she'd go and do exactly what they said she needed to do. And it was just so impressive to watch that journey and that stick-to-itiveness. And she finally got it. And it's been like this great heyday, but it's so tough because again, there's a ton of competition for those positions.
It's tough, man. We talk about it on this show all the time, and there's so many people out there, and I have conversations every day with people that are getting frustrated and they don't know what else to do. But to your point, I think that every situation has to be a learning experience. Mm-hmm. You have to reach out and try to find mentors. You have to practice. You have to ask good questions. You have to know what you're signing on for. You have to go above and beyond, and you have to put yourself out there. So this conversation is not about how to land your first MSL role, but obviously it's a big part of what we talk about here. I just think that, kind of ending it with the positive, you just saying that after 2 years, that person got a job.
Yeah.
I mean, look, that's sometimes what it takes, 2-3 years. But at the end of the rainbow, sometimes there's the pot of gold.
Yeah. And then, and in the meantime, you're learning, you're developing, I love that expression, you either win or you learn. Right. So everything that she did after those rejections added to her resume. And oh, by the way, I mean, sometimes you have to take a more circuitous path. And she ended up at a small company that was just starting, was building not just a team, but also filling the manager roles. Wow. For me, my first MSL director position came as a result of one of those catch-all med affairs positions where I was first in the door. So when the team was expanding, my boss said, what do you want to do next? Do you want to be a med director? Do you want to be an MSL director? And I was like, I want to be an MSL director. So it was like, there you go. So, I mean, you may not get it right away, but you position yourself. And again, you can kind of carve your own path sometimes if you take a different direction than just that straightforward, like, here's the job title, here's the job requisition on LinkedIn, I'm going to apply for it and I'm going to get it. Might not be that direct, but if you can be creative and think about other ways that you might get there, just keep the end goal in mind and keep pushing towards it. Awesome.
That's great advice. Let's leave it there. You are awesome, Danielle. I really
awesome,
appreciate you coming on. And I know a lot of people are going to use this advice and grow their career and maybe get jobs that they didn't think that they were going to get.
Yeah.
Because of you. And then they have to come back and they have to thank you. They have to send you a note on LinkedIn and say, Danielle, thank you, because I listened to that podcast and you helped me.
None of us do anything alone. I have a million people I could thank for where I am
Absolutely.
now. So.
Well, thanks again for coming on. We got to do this again sometime.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss episodes in the future, and feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.